It's election time in America, and obviously we don't have the answers yet to who won the presidency of the United States just yet. But we do know that the UFC and Dana White and Donald Trump are good friends. They have a strong relationship. And the question was actually posed to him after Contender Series the other day. How would a Biden presidency affect the UFC? And it's a really good question that a lot of people don't really necessarily understand all of the layers that could come into play here. So we're going to break it down for you. So, Pat, give me one reason to start off with how a Biden presidency could affect the UFC and their operation.
Yeah, sure thing. And it's very possible that we're recording this at a time when no one has called the race, right? By the time this gets out there, especially the way things are going, somebody may have called the race, but we all know there's going to be litigation that's going to get dragged out for a while. So we're still not going to know who the president is for weeks, probably, unfortunately. But biggest reason right off the bat why this is important and how a Biden presidency could affect the UFC is the National Relations of Labor or National Labor of Relations Board. Am I saying that right? Yes.
NLRB. Yes.
NLRB. That's there you go. National Labor Relations Board. There you go. So the big thing there is that, this plays a massive role in fighter pay and fighter unionization, more importantly. Currently, the head of the NLRB is someone that's very anti-union, has made their stance known that they are not about unions. They are all about classifying people that may have been considered employees under other administrations are considered contractors. It's the rise of the gig economy, right? If you haven't heard about it, which I'm sure you've heard about it. Think Uber drivers, think Lyft, all that stuff. The rise of the gig economy, a lot of that centers around independent contractor versus employee. And that's been a huge sticking point for fighter pay, right? The NLRB members are essentially appointed and recommended by the President of the United States. They serve 5-year terms, and the chair is selected essentially by the president as well. So the last NLRB chair, John Ring, was appointed back in 2018. It's very possible Biden gets in there and decides to move somebody else into the chair position while he's president. And that alone could make a big difference in terms of some of the ways the NLRB intervenes in different cases or says that, hey, we're going to file cases on people who are trying to become employees that are being classified as independent contractors. We may intervene here. And instead of being anti-union, they may be pro-union. Obviously, one fighter who's been very outspoken about all this has been Leslie Smith. And I got the chance to interview her a while back when she first made the jump over to Bellator. And a big thing that she had mentioned about unionization and Project Spearhead was that with the current administration and the current members in place on the NLRB, it's mostly a moot point. There's no reason to try and move forward and push for that while they know the kind of pushback they're going to get from all the way to the top. So that right there is a game changer for the UFC. If Biden especially puts somebody in there that's pro-union and that would help fighters become unionized, that would be, the ramifications there are endless for the company at that point.
No, 100%. And what's interesting is obviously, every candidate's going to have their own campaign website with their campaign promises. If you go to joebiden.com/empower workers, very first sentence under this tab is strong unions built the great American middle class. And you scroll down a little bit, he's got 3 bullet points. Those 3 bullet points read, check the abuse of corporate power over labor and hold corporate executives personally accountable for violation of labor laws. Encourage and incentivize unionization and collective bargaining, and ensure that workers are treated with dignity and receive the pay, benefits, and worker protections they deserve. So if he sticks to this and is able to put someone in place or, make sure that the NLRB has someone that will live these campaign promises as laid out on this website here, that could definitely affect the UFC's operation. And I know that Dana last night, or after the Contender Series on Wednesday, said that he's not too concerned about it. And I kind of get that. They're $1 billion company, right? They're gonna adjust to the leadership in the country and how they're trying to run things. But that would be a major adjustment if Biden is able to kind of, it was kind of joked during that little post fight interview there, that are they going to come after us, sort of thing. Well, they won't necessarily come after you, but I mean, if these changes start to be implemented, they really don't have to come right after you. It's going to be like, you guys are going to have to make some adjustments. So that's an interesting point to see how that plays out. I am curious though, if unionization becomes like a bigger thing, the NLRB does change. Do you suspect that the UFC would simply adjust their practices, from a pay standpoint, for example? We're going to up our percentage of pay, our percentage of our revenue to our fighters. Or do you think that they will kind of adjust beyond that?
That's a great question. And another big point about the NLRB that we should point out is, while new members are suggested by the president, right? And they have staggering terms. So it's not that, Biden comes in and we get a whole new board. The Senate does have to confirm those members. And that right now looks like the GOP might very well hang on to the Senate, in which case they may block some of those suggestions. It's hard to say. But it's not set in stone either. It looks like Georgia is going to have at least one runoff, possibly two. So who knows where that goes. But as it stands right now, it could be also that if Biden selects someone very pro-union and the GOP controls the Senate, they get shut down anyway. And that kind of leads, to less risk on the UFC's end. But in terms of your initial question, the interesting thing here is less about the UFC and more about Endeavor. So remember, Endeavor owns 51% of the company, right? And we've already seen instances where Endeavor has drained UFC money in a, so to speak, in the form of a dividend, a $300 million dividend to investors that included Mark Wahlberg and some of the other big names that own part of Endeavor and WME. And so right now, them making any sort of adjustment that hurts their bottom line seems extremely far-fetched, because Endeavor was one of the hardest hit companies in terms of losing revenue from the pandemic, right? All of their big acquisitions and everything that they had been buying up was all live sporting events, all live hospitality events, special parties, VIP parties for certain things that they can't do now because of the social distancing rules across so much of the country. So they are in a world of hurt, and they were already in a world of hurt when their IPO was pulled last minute because there wasn't enough interest on Wall Street to, sustain the share price that they were initially offering. They had to keep cutting it till it got to the point where they were like, no, we're just going to pull it. So they were already in a bad spot before the pandemic. Now they are in a terrible spot. Moody's and several credit rating agencies have talked about downgrading their debt, downgrading the UFC's debt as a result because of their relationship and how this all works. That's all very, very bad. The UFC has a ton of loans out against it. Even though they're making a bunch of revenue, they keep leveraging more and more debt against the company so that essentially you have free cash flow to keep going to Endeavor for dividends or buying other things or what have you. So their UFC, while in of itself is fine in terms of making revenue, great profits, still killing it, one of the first sports back, doing great in the pandemic, because they're part of this larger entity that is in such a bad state. I don't think that they'll make any changes whatsoever towards increasing fighter pay unless they crunch enough numbers and do the math and say, like, we can mitigate the risk a little bit by upping fighter pay this much and getting approval from Endeavor to do that. I think that's a very, very narrow possibility given everything that's happened in the past 2 years. So I think they'll probably stay to it and say nope and put it back on the fighters.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out because, one of the things also Dana, joked about last night, or again, Wednesday night, whenever you may be watching this, Wednesday after the Contender Series returns. The question was, or he just kind of joked. He's like, I don't know if he was joking or not. He said he doesn't even know if Biden knows who he is, which obviously Biden knows who he is because shout out to Ariel Helwani for sharing this clip again earlier today, him interviewing Dana White back in 2010. And Biden actually brought him in when he was vice president to kind of speak to him about things and, how they can kind of work together to get the message out about, politics and voting and things like that. So it's going to be interesting to see this play out because I would expect Biden, again, if he does win, Trump very well could win and nothing can change. This whole everything we're talking about is kind of moot, right? Mm-hmm. But the way things are trending right now, it looks like Biden will come away with this thing in a victory. Another one of the campaign promises that Biden has made is that he's going to govern or he's going to preside over this country for everyone. He's not going to be a Democratic president. So he's going to reach out across the aisle more than we've seen Trump do over the past 4 years, right? So I would suspect when you start looking at things and when it comes to affecting the economy, obviously sports is one of those big things like that. And like you mentioned, the UFC, one of the first back, I would imagine Joe Biden would want to reach out to Dana White relatively soon, or he would be up high on his list of people to call, right? Obviously, you think of NFL, MLB, NBA, MLB. After you get past the big three, UFC is probably the next one on your Rolodex there to get in touch with, to see what we can do as an administration, work together to kind of help kickstart this economy again, because that's going to be a big thing coming into the new year.
It's hard to say, right? You would think that, yes, that makes logical sense. UFC is a multi-billion-dollar company, one of the first sports back, one of the ones still running pretty smoothly. Haven't had to cancel any events since they've come back. You've got, huh?
They couldn't afford to. With
no, of course not.
ESPN.
No, yeah, they need that ESPN buddy. But I mean, they've been going pretty smoothly in terms of hosting events. You've had people catch COVID. You've had dropouts. We've seen some of that. If numbers continue to rise across the country, you're probably going to see more late night replacements, last minute changes, all of that. But that being said, they've been pretty effective. But this is the one instance where Dana's personal relationship with Trump may really hurt him, right? We're not just talking about, a guy that's running a company that you talked to back in 2010. We're talking about a guy who has gone out and publicly campaigned for Trump, has said, like, it's up to Trump. Nobody else can help. Biden's not going to get it done. It's going to fall into chaos. It's all this stuff. And you've got a guy that is so close to Trump that might hurt him here, where if Biden ends up being elected, he may go back and say, okay, he might not, he may look at the MLB, I'm sure he will look at the MLB, NFL, all the major sports, right? But he very well might stay away from White and people like Vince McMahon who have really close relationships with Trump, who are now on the sports cabinet. Very possible that White doesn't make the cut if Biden does his own sports cabinet, just because of the way that relationship works. Also, it's going to be hard on White's end because, Trump, he has said multiple times, Trump was pivotal in getting the UFC to keep going, right? Back in the early days in Atlantic City, all of that. Trump has gone to a UFC event, UFC 244. He shows up to the UFC event. It's a big deal. He's so close there that, if he does take a call from Biden and say, yeah, I'm going to be on that cabinet, does Trump lash out? Is there, and is burning that bridge okay for White? Who knows? There's no real way to say how it will go if Biden gets elected, if he'll even extend the olive branch, and whether or not White will take it. Because this is such a weird situation, because unlike 2010, you've got White being good friends with Biden's opponent. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that at the very least, I would definitely expect Dana White to not reach out to Biden.
Yes.
I would expect that. I think that's a given, right? I think he's not going to go out of his way to reach out to him and, see like, hey, what can we do to help you guys, help get this thing started. He's not going to suggest, hey, you should do what Trump did with this sports board thing. Like, that's not going to happen.
Right.
I think we're all safe in that assumption, rather. But I think one of the other things that is kind of tied into this is the effect that it has on the fans. Do you think that this like affects the fans at all, given how outspoken Dana White has been in his support of Trump and putting out a documentary on Trump for virtually no reason at all, unprompted? And, like we've seen other behind the scenes people at the UFC speaking out about how Trump wasn't really mentioned by the UFC or Dana White for decades, and until all of a sudden, oh, Trump's president. Okay, let's prop him up again for some reason. And we've seen that effect rub off on the fighters as well. You've seen a lot of fighters, Colby Covington going with the MAGA gimmick, seeing Jorge Masvidal being very outspoken, speaking at rallies for Trump. Like, how much does this affect the fans at all, do you think?
I think it's one of those things where, from the fans' perspective, I can't imagine it's going to really affect their view on the product or the UFC. If anything, I'd imagine they view White and a lot of these fighters as, at least for the fans that are GOP and very pro Trump and pro MAGA, which is a lot of them from what we've seen. I think the fans, understand that this is out of White's control, right? Clearly, White voted for Trump. If he didn't, then talk about a whole other scenario. But I mean, it certainly seems that they'll view him as, in the same group, that this is beyond his control. If he has to work with Biden, it's because, it wasn't him, it was other people and all of this stuff. So I don't imagine the fans will really care that much, because to them, they're probably going to, the ones that are very pro-Trump are probably going to be upset by the election if Biden does win, but they'll turn to a product like UFC almost as a, like, well, here's, a product I can turn to that I love, that I know holds my beliefs and values. I think that a lot of them identify with that. So I think White and company are safe in that regard. If White goes out and starts, talking and praising about how great Biden is and then starts doing videos for him, then maybe you have a problem, but that's not going to happen. So
no, it's not going to happen. That won't happen for sure. But I mean, speaking for me personally, like, I'm the biggest anti-Trump person in the world. The MAGA gimmicks from Colby Covington, make my skin crawl, but I still tune in every week. I'm not going to miss a fight. So I'm able to shut that out. I understand that Dana White's support for Donald Trump has nothing to do with how Jeff Neal and Wonderboy Thompson plays out here in a couple of weeks. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Those are two fighters in there fighting for their own personal livelihood. Now, I do understand that things that we talked about earlier in this video, if a union, that becomes more of a readily available option, the NLRB board changes, and those kind of things, and fighter pay increases, that kind of stuff affects individual fighters, obviously. But I think, at least, again, from my perspective, from someone who watches every single weekend, it's not going to deter me one way or the other who wins this election. And therefore, I think it doesn't affect the UFC for people that think like me, that are just tuning in for the fights. They don't care about all that other stuff at the end of the day.
Well, I will say this. I would say, based on what we talked about before, right? Let's say Biden puts a bunch of very pro-union guys in the NLRB during his term. Senate lets him through, regardless of how it shakes out. Let's say that fighters immediately unionize, and then you've got kind of that going on. Okay. Even then, that's probably not going to be viewed in of itself. It's not going to be viewed as a big, oh, this is because Biden won. They'll probably say, like, fighters are unionizing, and it's, between the fighters and Dana, and they'll look at it through that lens. They won't, the most fans will probably not realize or forget or not really care that the reason that that's all possible is because Biden won in the first place, right? It's probably not going to get recalled and then somehow traced back to the presidency that much, unless Biden goes and publicly talks about it. But all that being said, there is one instance where this could come back to the fans and they could tie it to the presidency, and that comes down to fighter visas. So, I spoke with Sherrod Seward a while back on the Fight Business podcast. You should check it out if you haven't seen it. It's a great interview. He's doing a bunch of different combat sports visas, getting people, from all over the world to come to the US to fight in boxing, MMA, all of that stuff. Very knowledgeable dude. Great interview. Highly suggest you check it out. But something that I brought up is, right now, in the rules for letting people into the country and what types of visas they can come on and how much they have to pay in order to get these visas and expedition of visas. That was a huge thing we talked about, of getting some of these visas expedited so people could come into the country, faster than, it getting lost or being all over the place. It's possible that with a Biden presidency, those rules change, that they say, you know what? Nope, we're going on a lockdown, just like how at the beginning of all this, right? Trump just said no flights from China, and essentially shut that down at a point. Biden could say, you know what, I'm going to ban flights from these countries because they're big COVID hotspots. He's already said he's going to take a much more aggressive stance on COVID than Trump has. If that becomes the case, then you could be looking at situations where Leon Edwards, if he wants to fly in to fight Khamzat Chimaev and England will let him do it, Biden might not let him. He might say, you know what, that's a hot spot right now. You had to lock down. We're not letting you through. You could do that for places all over the world. Brazil, another big COVID hotspot with everything that's been going on down there, could easily just say, nope, we're not letting flights from Brazil in if you spike to a certain level of cases. The pandemic is still very much raging. We're getting to a point of a vaccine, hopefully soon, but we don't have any firm timelines on any of that stuff. If he takes a harder stance on that type of, situation where a fighter's coming in just and getting a visa just to fight and then leaving the country, it's very possible that we don't get to see matchups that we want to see, and that a lot of bigger name fighters from around the world, because remember, there's only one American champion, that's Stipe Miocic at heavyweight. The rest is from all over the world, and a lot of the champions do live in the US now. But again, what if Khabib comes back? There's a idea for you. What if Khabib's like, you know what, I'm coming back for 30-0, but cases spike in Dagestan and Russia, and Biden says, you know what, nope, shutting it down. That's when the fans are going to be affected. That's when they're going to be like, wait a minute, we had this booked and now it can't happen. Why? Because of, the administration's policy. That's when it ties into who wins this. And I think that's the biggest noticeable difference that fans are going to see in the short term if Biden does in fact become president.
Yeah, no doubt. And that would definitely be a huge blow to the UFC for a lot of reasons, right? If the country goes back on lockdown for however long, even though they have Fight Island, they can't get there, right? Right. So unless if they're able to remotely put together a whole team of people in Abu Dhabi to keep the fights going, that would be an impressive feat, by the way. Then that would be amazing. But yeah, there's a lot of things that could come into play here. And like you mentioned with the visas, man, having that relationship there with the president to call in a favor, be like, hey, I need this guy here. I need this visa approved, expedited. I need it. You don't have that. You don't have the lifeline with Biden. So right. I think that's one of the more serious, not necessarily serious, but one of the more, important connections here to the current Trump presidency for Dana White is to be able to call in that favor on that sort of issue. The things about the unions and stuff like that, there's a lot of layers to that it's not just like hey, I pick up the phone call, I need this done. There's a lot of layers, like you mentioned, with the NLRB, with the Senate approval, as you mentioned as well, the GOP Senate looks like it's going to be in place. Mitch McConnell's still going to be there. And we all know how Mitch McConnell acts. You put something on his desk, it's like it might as well just be a dust magnet, right? So unless it's his idea, because he'll
Right.
push through
Yeah.
his ideas all the time. But that's neither here nor there. That's a whole nother topic for another channel and everything. But I mean, I'm curious to see how this does play out. I don't expect too egregious or too significant of a change, like Dana was kind of saying, but I do expect them to adjust. I would expect the UFC to adjust to whatever changes are coming their way under a new president, because they're going to have to. Like you said, Endeavor is at the head of this thing right now. They need to figure out how to be profitable and how to be profitable very quickly. So whatever they have to do, whatever new rules that they have to curtail to, they're going to do it. So, at the end of the day, the UFC likes to, or Dana White likes to, say that, hey, I'm still running this show. I'm still running everything the day to day. Like, I am the guy still. Except for when Endeavor needs to come in and knock on your door, right? So that's what we could be looking at here. So I don't know. Any other interesting, I guess, viewpoints on this possibility of the effects of the UFC under the Biden presidency?
No, I mean those are the big buckets, right? You could get lots of little things here and there.
Yeah.
I'm sure Biden will issue plenty of executive orders if he ends up becoming president, and who knows what they will be, especially if they pertain to COVID. I mean, there will be a lot of layers to those as well. But yeah, in terms of the ways that a Biden presidency could affect the UFC, those are the big ones, really. And again, like you said, the UFC will adapt. They have to. Endeavor needs cash flow, even if it is reduced, even if you have to go to Abu Dhabi and pay everybody. And, they had that 5-year agreement with Abu Dhabi and the tourism board before this all started. They've now gone and created Fight Island, done all this. I am sure they had to make some concessions in order to get that to happen. What those are, we don't really know. There's been a lot of reports about, Abu Dhabi pretty much paying for all of it. Well, that's fine. I mean, and I could see that. But if that's happening, I guarantee that in terms of their 5-year deal, they're either crunching that down or they're renegotiating. They're not just pouring endless money into this for nothing. There's something going on there. We don't know exactly what. But you could get another situation like that. And even if the costs do rise for the UFC, because they would if you're hosting on Fight Island for every fight, that's still worth it if you're making enough profit that Endeavor can get it something. Because as you mentioned earlier with the ESPN deal and the UFC, like they're doing fights as much as they can. And it's, yes, it will restart in terms of the amount of fights they have to put on annually. It will restart come January and come whoever's president, but they will need to still hit all of those events. And if Biden decides to crack down on things, they will adapt. They will know ahead of time they'll see something. That's UFC's always been very adaptive. I don't think that's going to change. And I don't think there's anything that could happen if Biden wins where all of a sudden the UFC shuts down or it's just like, oh, we're done here. That I can't believe that'll happen. They'll figure something out.
100%. They're going to have to adapt. They're going to have to adjust. I mean, the UFC, they've proven time and time again that they know how to make money. Sometimes, to the detriment of the actual people that are doing the most in terms of the fighters. But hey, they're going to figure out a way to stay profitable. They're trying to build UFC Nevada essentially out there in Vegas. So they'll make it happen one way or the other. I have faith in the UFC that they're going to find a way to make sure that their bank account stays pumping in some money. But I think obviously for them, a Trump presidency would be more beneficial. But yeah, we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very possible, Biden wins the presidency, nothing changes for the UFC at all. It's very possible as well. He's obviously looking to change a lot. And who knows where he gets to things. Campaign promises versus actually what happens in the presidency, always different. So we'll see what happens. But one thing is for sure, I doubt Biden is going to be coming to UFC events like Trump would in the future. So there's that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Stay tuned. We'll keep you guys updated. Subscribe to the channel. Thumbs up the video. We'd appreciate it. Check out the other stuff on the channel as well. And we'll keep you updated. Obviously, this is an interesting topic just to kind of keep our eyes and ears on.